In Matthew chapter 5, where we're reading throughout the week, Jesus is teaching, and he's teaching on a mountain. And as he's teaching, there's a large crowd below him. And as he's communicating with him, he makes a couple statements that he's desiring for the people to follow. See, a lot of times when Jesus makes statements, he doesn't fully, the statements aren't fully developed to us. What we have to do is meditate and figure out what it is that he's desiring from us and for us through the statements that he's making. And so in Matthew chapter 5, in verse 13 through 16, Jesus says this, and we're going to think about these statements today. He says this, "You are the salt of the earth. But if salt loses its flavor, how shall it be seasoned? It is then good for nothing, but to be thrown out and then trampled on underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hillside cannot be hidden. Nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand. And it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see the good works and glorify their Father in heaven." And so as Jesus is speaking to a crowd, you can imagine, he makes this statement and he says, listen, you are the salt for this community. You're the salt for your family. You're the salt for your friends. You're the salt for your home. See, you're the salt for the work and the job that you go to every single day. You are the salt. And you can imagine as people are sitting there and they're listening and they're like, salt? How am I? Salt? And then he says this, you are also the light. You're the light to your family. You're the light in your relationships. You're the light to your friends. You're the light to your neighbors. You're the light to your community. You're the light at your job. And then he moves on. And he leaves it just with that. And so it makes us have to figure out, what is it, Jesus, that you meant by these statements? See, in the first statement, he says, you're the salt of the earth. And he says, but if salt loses its saltiness, what's it good for? If you're not doing what you have been created to do, what are you good for? If you're not fulfilling the purpose that you have been created for, then what really are you doing here? And Jesus looks at the crowd and he says, you are the salt of the earth. And so as we begin to think about salt, and as we begin to think about what salt is used for and what salt is good for, we also have to think about what salt is not good for. And salt used in the wrong way, what it can do. And so here's the thing about salt when you think about it. For my kids, I like cooking in the summer, and I like going outside, and I like grilling. I have a really, really hard time with steak, though, because sometimes I can make the perfect steak, and it tastes incredible. But then other times, I can do the exact same thing that I did before, and I go out there, and the steak tastes like beef jerky. And it is hard, and you are tearing, and you chew, and it is so chewy that your jaws begin to hurt when you're chewing it. And I'm smiling, like, this is good. And the kids are kind of like, what in the world? Like, this is terrible, Dad. Because they don't hold back. They tell you the truth. But sometimes, see, what happens is if you take salt and you go out to a steak, if you put too much salt on that steak, the problem is this. What they eat and consume as a child, they don't want to return to later on. See, if you oversalt it, it ruins the experience and causes them not to desire to come back and not desire to return to what was supposed to be so good for them. See, you and I We're the salt of the earth. But if we use the salt in the wrong way, then all of a sudden, we have conversations with people like this. I would go to church, but all I see is a bunch of hypocrites. I would go to church, but I was hurt. I would go to church, but this happened. I would follow Jesus, but there's no difference between them and me. And all of a sudden, the saltiness that was supposed to make what they were consuming so good turns out to be something that turns them away and never want to taste it again. See, you're the salt of the earth. But if you don't use your saltiness the way that God has created you to use it, then all of a sudden what happens is people don't start following you. See, here's what Jesus desires, is Jesus desires for the people that you know, for the friends that you have, for the people that are in relationship and in your community, to look to you and say, I desire what he has. I desire the life, I desire the relationship that he has. But when you are not seasoned and salty the way that you are supposed to be, and you give too much, and you turn them away, then all of a sudden what they were supposed to do in looking to you and desiring Jesus, all of a sudden turns them away. And they start walking away from what they were supposed to love and supposed to desire more than anything. See, I love steak. But if I season it the wrong way, my kids don't desire it anymore. If I undercook it, my kids don't want it. And so now it's up to you and I as the salt. See, you have to understand, salt is never the main ingredient. Can you imagine just taking salt and just... so good. Let's have a meal of just salt. Salt was never the main ingredient. See, you have to understand in your life, you're not the main ingredient. You are the seasoning for the one that is greater than you. You're the seasoning for the one that is to be presented to everybody else. See, when you bring a steak out, and it is hot, and it is perfect, and it is cooked to absolute perfection, you put just a little salt on there, and it enhances that flavor that you are tasting. See, the flavor that they're supposed to taste is Jesus, not you. But the problem is, a lot of times you put yourself in front of Jesus and they begin to taste you and they begin to see you. And you are undesirable to them. You are not the change that they need. The change that they need is Jesus. But the problem is, you're giving them too much of you instead of Jesus. And as they get more of you, the less they want of Jesus. Because they don't see the change that is necessary in order to follow Jesus that you're supposed to be living. But salt also does this. Salt also can leave scars. I did that first service too. Jeez. Salt also leaves scars. I don't know what it is about being in high school and doing dumb things. But it's something I did on a regular basis. We would sit at the lunch table and we would place salt on our arm, and then we would get an ice cube and we would place the ice cube over the salt. Here's what happens. I'm no scientist, but I know this. It burns a hole in your arm and hurts like crazy. But for some reason, we would sit there at the lunch table seeing who could hold it on the longest and last the longest, and then we would come back the next day and we would do it all over again. And we would just sit there and we would hold, and then you'd pull it off and you'd have this big, and by, a month later, you've got a scar on your arm from doing this stupid thing. I have asked Heather, it's crazy how things have changed from being in high school to now. Because now when Heather and I have dinner together, I'll get the salt out, pull it on my arm, and we're sitting at a restaurant, and I'm like, come on, babe. And she's like, you're an idiot. I'm like, I know. No, I have no desire to do it anymore. I don't know why I ever did that. But here's the thing about salt. Salt, when used wrong, leaves a scar. You, when presenting Jesus wrong, will leave a scar. See, what do you hear from people a lot of times? I would go to church, but they're hypocrites. What does that mean? That means if you start to open them up and start to look deeper inside, they've got scars on the inside. They've got some pains that they've dealt with. They've got some struggles with people who are supposedly supposed to be called Christians, and they've never been able to get over that. See, what they want is they desire a relationship with Jesus, but the problem is, in order to try and find a relationship with Jesus, they're just finding a bunch of people who leave scars. Because here's what we do a lot of times as follower of Jesus. We put our nose in the air and we think that God loves us more because we're not acting like other people around us. Ha! I don't do that anymore. I don't live that way anymore. I don't know if you've ever walked into a scene or a scenario where you feel like the odd one out, where you feel like you don't belong. This was me early on as a pastor. I had been a youth pastor all of my life, and now I'm stepping onto the scene of being the pastor. And I was in a room, and I don't know how I got in the room, but I was in the room with pastors who are spiritual giants. And I felt absolutely uncomfortable. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want them to know how I felt. See, a lot of times when people walk through the doors of the church, they walk through the doors of the church and they try to just go and sit and hide. Because they don't want anybody to know the scars that they have dealt with. They don't want anybody to know how uncomfortable they feel. Because here's what I felt in that room. I can't speak as good as them. He's incredible. Why would you amen that point? Thanks. Now it just confirms it even more. Okay. But I was looking out, I was like, I can't speak and communicate like that. Like, they can alliterate and communicate so well. And I was like, I can't lead like they lead. I can't do what they do. Their spiritual life, their prayer life, I know mine's not as good as theirs. Their relationship with the Lord, mine's not there. And I felt so uncomfortable and out of place. I desired that. I wanted that, but I felt out of place because I knew in my life there are some scars that I didn't want them to see. And there are some things inside of me that I didn't want exposed. And there was some pride, and there was some arrogance, and there was some immaturity that I was dealing with that I didn't want them to know and to expose. See, there's a lot of times people walk through the doors of the church and they've got a lot of scars. And the problem is when they walk in, they look and they say, oh, they've got everything together. Oh, they're perfect. Look at that couple. Oh my goodness, I bet they've never had an argument in their entire life. Look at them. Man, they are so good together. I wish our, and all of a sudden, everything that you feel like is wrong begins to be exposed. And you get super uncomfortable. I wish my relationship with the Lord was like that. Knowing that when you were just in the car, you were screaming and yelling at your wife, you were screaming and yelling at the kids, like, you better not embarrass me when we get out of this car. And that everybody in the room is carrying around scars. And everybody in the room is dealing with the issue. But the problem is, as a church, a lot of times what we try to do is we try to cover our scars better than anybody else so that nobody else thinks we have any issues or any problems. That once we accept Jesus, everything is perfect and fine. And so we hold our nose up, we hold our shoulders back, and we walk through rooms and we walk through places letting people think that everything is perfect. When really underneath everything, there are some scars that have been exposed that we don't want anybody to know about. See, the thing is, the church is the best at playing the game. And that's why people say, church is full of a bunch of hypocrites. Because I've seen your scars, but yet you walk through the doors and you hide them. And you act like everything is okay. See, what we have to do is you have to understand this. Your salvation does not make you perfect. Your salvation does not make you, once you accept Jesus as your Savior, you're not perfect. You are still flawed. You are still screwed up. You still need Jesus every single day. But what salvation gives you is forgiveness and grace. And it gives you a covering for that sin. And as you walk on a daily basis, you don't walk in perfection of holding your nose up and looking at everybody and saying, I don't have any scars. I'm good now. You hold your head up and you say, I'm forgiven and I am walking in grace. And I want you to see my forgiveness and the grace that God has given me. See, because here's what salt does to an open wound. It burns. See, we don't want to take what God intends for good and use it in a way that God never intended. And so here's how God intended for us to use salt. Salt flavors. See, salt makes what you are about to consume better than it was before. See, what you are supposed to do as people look to Jesus is you are supposed to be the flavor that people look at and people say, but I know who Johnny was. I know him from back then. I know him from last week. I know him from yesterday. I'm coaching my kids in basketball. And games get pretty intense. I'm not going to lie. I'm competitive. And so I yell at people. But I know Johnny from yesterday. And see, what ends up happening is people become more attracted to Jesus because they look at me and they say, if he can do it, I can do it. See, that's what salt gives it a flavor of desire. Salt gives it a flavor that says, I want to consume what they have. See, this is what salt does. I'm looking at your life and I'm desiring who you are and what you have. I'm looking at your life and I'm saying, I don't have what you have, but I want it more than anything. I want the change and the difference that Jesus has made in your life. I want that in my life. That's the flavor of salt that we are to bring to Jesus. But then salt also does this. Salt preserves. See, salt makes what you consume last longer. See, think about it this way. If you want to make a steak last and you buy it, but you're not willing to eat it in that moment, you take salt and you rub it all over it. Because salt will then be consumed, and then what it will do is it will preserve it for a later and longer day. Here's our desire as we meet with people. When they don't accept Jesus, when they don't follow him, that it leaves a lasting taste and a longing inside of them. That when they're sitting at home and they're by themselves and they say, the interaction that I have, I've got to go talk to them again. I've got to go see them again. I've got to get through the doors of the church again because there was something there that is sticking with me and I can't get rid of it. There's something there that is hanging on, and I'm trying to push it aside. See, some of you have been fighting in your relationship with the Lord. You've been fighting in order to make him number one in your life, and it continues to hold on and hold on and hold on. That's because who Jesus is, he's not giving up on you. He is not going to stop chasing you. He is not going to stop coming after you. He is going to pursue you until you become the person that he has created you to be. See, salt makes there be a lasting flavor inside of you. But here's what light does. See, if salt is what we're supposed to be, but we're also supposed to be light, here's what light does. The lack of light always brings fear. The lack of light in your life, in my life, it always brings fear. My kids, we have a 2-story house. We have a walkout basement. And so when you go downstairs at night, it can get really, really dark because there's not windows down there on some of the house. And so it can get really, really dark at night. One thing that my kids love doing is my kids love for me to go downstairs, turn off all the lights, and then try to scare them to death. They love it. The crazy thing is this. They are familiar with what is down there. And they know who is down there. But when the lights go off, fear takes over. Now all of a sudden, what is normal to them, walking down the stairs, going down, sitting down on the couch, watching TV, going to the bedroom, going to into the bathroom, whatever it is, going to the playroom, whatever it is that they may do down there on a normal basis, when the lights go off, everything changes. You know what they don't like doing at night? Going down and turning off all the lights. Hey, before bed, run down there and make sure all the lights are off. Dad, please no. Can you send somebody with me? You've been down there for 4 hours. I know, but I don't want to turn the lights off. Why? Because the lack of light creates a fear inside of us. And so my kids will walk downstairs and I will be in a room and I'll be, ooh, and they're screaming, ah! They know it's me. Like they know I'm right there. And so I'll take a ball and I'll throw it over on the other side of the room and it'll hit and they'll turn this way. And then I take off at a dead sprint running as fast as I can and grab them. And they are screaming, ah! And they even start crying sometimes. And I'm like, seriously, it's me. Like, you told me to come down here and do that. But here's the thing. The absence of light always creates fear. Look in your life. When God is not big in your life, fear begins to creep in. Why? Because your problems and your situations get bigger than the God that you are serving. And then when the problems and the situations get bigger and your God is smaller, all of a sudden fear creeps in. See, when your God becomes small in a situation, fear begins to creep in. Philippians says this, don't fear anything. Don't fear anything. But, God, what about my finances? Don't fear anything. What about my relationships? Don't fear anything. What about my job? Don't fear anything. What about the health of my kids and my family? Don't fear anything. What about when things aren't looking like they're supposed to and what's in front of me does not match the fact that you are saying don't fear? Don't fear anything. But God, it's not adding up. God, it's not making sense. God, you're telling me not to fear, but what's in front of me? It's not good. Don't fear anything. But in everything, pray. Don't fear anything, but in everything. And so your response to the lack of light in your life, your response to a God that is small in a situation is to pray your God bigger. Is to get on your knees and say, God, I'm not leaving until you are bigger than the situation. Because then it says this, don't fear anything, but in everything pray. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. And so now all of a sudden, I hit my knees and I'm saying, God, the situation, the fear is over. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get through this. I don't know how to make it. But I'm not leaving my knees until I have peace. Because fear is not going to control me. The darkness is not going to win in my life. I am not going to let the enemy rob what you are going to use. I'm not going to let the enemy rob my joy and overcome the light with darkness. Because that's what happens in our life. Light never is overcome by darkness. The light is just turned off and taken out or covered up. See, you have to understand, every time light is turned on, light always wins. Always. But the problem is, we either turn it off or we cover it up. Fear comes into your life because your God is too small. Your light's covered up. As soon as you turn it on. So then here's what my kids started doing. They started getting flashlights. And they would come down, and when they got scared, they would make it as far as they could, and then when they got scared, and they would see. Okay, I'm good. It's just you, Dad. Well, no kidding. Yeah, send me down here. I've been doing this for 30 minutes. Same result every time. You wet your pants and you cry. And then we do it again. But what? Why? Because darkness will rob you of what God desires in your life. God desires joy. God desires peace. And darkness says fear and worry and anxiety. So what do we have to do? We have to keep the light on. But what else does the light do? See, the light also brings confusion. And so or the darkness also brings confusion. The lack of light always brings confusion. Here's what I mean. My kids like sleeping in pallets on our floor. On the weekend, on Friday night, what we do is we'll go get in bed. The older I get, the earlier bedtime comes. It is crazy to me. I used to be able to stay up till 1 and get up at like 6, and I'm good and feel great. Now, if I'm not in bed by 8:30, I feel like the world is stopped. I'm just like at the Thunder games that start at 9:30, I'm doing everything I can to keep my eyes open and watch them because I like watching, but I can't stay awake. I've got to get in bed. So the kids want to stay up, and so we just bring them into our room, we turn a movie on, and we watch it. Here's the problem, though. In the darkness, what is in front of me that I know, all of a sudden becomes confusing to me for direction. Because I know they're laying there, and so as I'm walking through the room in darkness, a lot of times they're asleep, and I step, and I land on an arm. I step, and I hit a leg. Why? Because the darkness has changed the situation that was in front of me. Because the darkness has made it different to me in the surrounding that I am normal and natural in. Here's the thing. In your marriage right now, some of you are walking through a dark season. And the relationship that you're in is confusing to you. Why? Because the light in your relationship all of a sudden is getting dimmer and dimmer until it's off. And what you have been walking in, and the relationship that you've been walking in that for so many years was so good. See, my kids, when the light's on and they're laying in the floor, no issue. But as soon as the light goes out, everything changes. See, for some of you, the jobs that you're walking through, the relationships that you're in, what's going on, here's the problem. The light's going out. And it's creating confusion in a situation that has never been confusing before. Here's the thing. Here's the thing about light. Light always wins. See, light will always break through the darkness. When you turn light on, it always wins. I'm a big time hunter. And I don't call myself a hunter, I call myself a killer, because I go out there and slay me some animals. I don't actually at all. I'm terrible. I'm awful. And so I go out there and I hunt. My problem is I'm wearing cologne and the wrong clothes and everything. And deers just kind of look at me and laugh and run away. I was going hunting, and as I'm heading out there, here's the problem. Darkness creates fear. I hate walking through the woods early in the morning or late at night. Hate it. Because all of a sudden, in darkness, you hear things that you never hear in the light. The farther you get away from God, the more wrong voices you begin to hear in your head. I got out of my truck, and I'm heading to the deer stand. And I'm about probably 3/4 of a mile from the deer stand, a mile away. So I've got a long walk ahead of me. And normally, got 2 guns on. Normally, I've got 3 guns on me. 1, 2, and then a pistol. But this time, I only took 2 with me. I only took 2. I left my pistol in the truck. And I also, as I'm walking, I forgot my flashlight. And as I'm walking, I realize, I'm like, oh, stink. Because I jumped out of the truck, I got out of there pretty quick, and my lights on my truck were still on, and so they were showing the path, and then as soon as they went off, all of a sudden everything changed. And I was like, man. And I was already about 100 yards away from my truck, and I was like, I'm good. I'm fine. And I just continue to walk towards the deer stand. And as I'm walking towards the deer stand, there's a group of trees over here. And all of a sudden, I hear it was either a bear, a mountain lion, or an actual lion that escaped from the zoo that day. They didn't report it, but I'm sure it was out there. I hear it. And I am standing, walking, and all of a sudden, as I'm walking, I hear this. Ooh. It's funny. That's funny. Yeah. No, it was an actual mountain lion. I hear this, and this is what lions sound like in the woods, if you did not know. They stomp their foot, and then they... That's the sound of a lion, I promise. Not a deer, okay? And I'm walking, but all of a sudden, here's what your mind does. Your mind begins to play games in the dark. And your mind begins to tell you things that are not true. Because in my mind, as I was walking through the woods, I've seen videos, and I've heard like deer stomp their feet and they blow. But in my mind, all of a sudden, instead of continuing the direction that I'm supposed to go, I freeze. And all of a sudden I stop and I can't move. And I'm frozen in fear because of the darkness. But as soon as I turned on the light, I didn't have a flashlight on me. I got my bow, an arrow from my bow, and I put it in my hand, and I was standing there. I ripped my shirt open, and I'm like, come on! And just screaming and swinging it at things, couldn't see anything. And I backed up. I didn't turn. I backed up the whole time watching those trees, walking back to my truck the whole time. Made it home safe. Like Heather rolls over, and she's like, what are you doing home? I thought you were hunting. I was like, a mountain lion tried to attack me. You cannot hunt in those scenarios. Like, I'm got to provide for my family. So I was thinking of them, not me. But here's the thing. As soon as I got in my truck and I turned the light on, all of a sudden the voices that were lying to me in my head went away. See, some of you, you're hearing the wrong voices in your mind because of the darkness. Light always wins. You want to hear the right voice? You have to run towards the light of who God is in your life. See, but here's the other thing. Light also illuminates where you're going. Light always also shows where you're going. But here's the problem. As you shine a light can only go so far. But what Jesus desires for us is for the light that we are to people is to illuminate in front of them their next step. Just follow Jesus. Where? Your next step. But where am I going up there? Like, what do I do when I get... Just follow him your next step. This is what he's showing you. So take that step. But what if I take that step, what about when I get 3, 4, 5 years down the road? What's going to happen then? Just follow him your next step. Just follow him your next step. See, a lot of us, we're trying to create light in a situation, in a scenario that we can't fathom and we can't see yet. And what Jesus is doing is he's saying, I want you to be a light for people to show them their next step, not show them all the way down in their future. Like, that's not what they need to, what they need to see is where they take their next step. When we went to Africa as a family in a mission trip, when you walk through the jungle in Africa, one thing you learn is there are no street lamps. And when it is dark, it is dark. And so you pull out a flashlight and you shine the flashlight down. Because if you don't, you're tripping over branches, you're tripping over roots, you're going to get off the path, you're going to go the wrong direction. And so you keep the flashlight down so that it illuminates your next step. Stop worrying about 10 years down the road and start trusting God for your next step. Take your next step forward. Believe him that when he is calling you to something new, when he is calling you in a new direction, God, I'm trusting you, here's my next step. God, I'm following you, here's my next step. I don't know what's happening up there. I don't know what's going on, but I know this. If I take this next step, this is what you want me to do, and I'm going to do that. But here's what a light does also. The last thing is this. A light always illuminates the right person. When you hold the light up that you are supposed to be, you shine it on the one that it is supposed to illuminate. And that's Jesus. Your light is to shine a light on Jesus, not on yourself. See, what you have to understand is this world, it's not about Johnny. It's not about me, and it's not having people, look at me, look at what I've done, look at what we've accomplished, look at how much we've been able to do, look at all the things that we have done. No, it's look at what God has done. Look at who He is. Look at how He can change your life. Look at how He can bring hope. Look at how He can change your future. And so when you take the light of who Jesus is and put it in the right direction, Jesus changes everything. Listen, Johnny doesn't change anything, but Jesus changes everything. But the problem is, a lot of times, the reason that people look at the church and don't desire the church is because too many times the light is pointed on us. But what people desire when they walk through the doors of a church is when the light is shined on Jesus and on who He is, then they realize their desperate need for Him. We have to be the salt and the light for this earth that changes this earth because the light is pointed towards Jesus. Will you pray with me?